Amphibious tractors: how the U.S. solved the problem of landing on Japanese beaches. Before the United States Marines could take a Pacific island, they first had to solve a problem that, honestly, had defeated every amphibious assault in history: how to get men from a ship to a beach without them getting shot in the process. The standard solution in 1942 was the Higgins boat, a shallow draft landing craft that delivered troops to the water's edge. The problem was the water's edge. Men had to wade the last 100 yards through surf, often under fire, carrying, 60 pounds of gear. In the Pacific, the problem was worse. Japanese defenders chose islands ringed by coral reefs. A Higgins boat couldn't cross a reef. That meant troops had to disembark in deep water, sometimes 1,000 yards from shore, and wade the entire distance. The solution, interestingly enough, came from an unlikely source: a civilian inventor in Florida named Donald Roebling. Back in 1935, he built a rescue vehicle designed specifically to navigate the swamps and shallow waters of the Everglades after hurricanes. Roebling called his creation the Alligator. It was tracked, amphibious, and could crawl over mud, sand, and coral with, well, equal indifference. He honestly had no military application in mind. He just wanted to reach people the Coast Guard simply couldn't. The Marine Corps discovered Roebling's Alligator in 1937. It actually took them 3 years to convince the Navy to fund development. The Navy's initial reaction was that landing craft should float, not crawl, and that tracks were, frankly, unnecessary complexity. By 1941, the Marines had their vehicle, the Landing Vehicle Tracked, or LVT. The Navy classified it as a tractor, a term that, well, conveniently avoided admitting they had been wrong about the tracks. The first major test came at Tarawa in November 1943. The Navy's intelligence said the tides would be high enough for Higgins boats to clear the reef. The intelligence was wrong. Higgins boats grounded on the reef 500 yards from shore. Marines jumped into chest-deep water and walked toward the beach under machine gun fire. Casualties were, honestly, catastrophic. But the LVTs, the Amtraks, crawled right over the reef. The LVTs that made it to shore carried the first waves ashore. They took fire, they took casualties, but they got men onto the beach dry. After Tarawa, no Pacific invasion would launch without them. But the LVT was not a perfect weapon. Early models had thin armor. A heavy machine gun could punch through. They were slow on land, topping out at about 15 miles per hour. And honestly, they had a tendency to catch fire when hit. The Marines adapted. They added armor plate, sometimes scavenged from wrecked Japanese vehicles. They replaced the side-loading design with a rear ramp, so troops could exit without exposing themselves to fire from the front. They also created the LVT, with an A for armored, which added a tank turret to the chassis. The Amtrak now not only delivered infantry to the beach, but could actually support them once they got there. At Saipan, the LVTs didn't stop at the beach. They pushed inland, crossing terrain that would have stopped wheeled vehicles cold. The Japanese defenders had prepared defensive positions based on the assumption that the Americans would be pinned on the shoreline. They assumed wrong. The LVTs punched through the first line of defenses before the Japanese could even reposition. The battle for the island still took about 3 weeks, but the initial breach happened in just a few hours. The LVT's legacy, really extends to the present day. Every modern amphibious vehicle used by the Marine Corps, from the AAV to the new ACV, traces its lineage back to Roebling's Alligator and the men who saw its potential. But the deeper lesson of the LVT is about how militaries actually innovate. The Marines didn't wait for a perfect vehicle. Instead, they took a civilian machine, accepted its flaws, and put it into combat while continuing to improve it. The doctrine that emerged, ship-to-shore mobility over the horizon assault mechanized exploitation from the beach, was written not by generals in Washington, but by mechanics and welders in the Pacific, modifying vehicles between invasions. If you want to understand how technology meets reality in combat, and why the best equipment is often the equipment that exists while you're improving it, subscribe to War Machiner and share this with anyone who appreciates the machines that made the difference.